They say the only thing harder than leaving the West is coming back to face what you left behind. Caleb Montgomery didn't ride back to Purgatory Creek for forgiveness. He rode back to bury a father who despised him and to sell the dusty acres of the Double M Ranch that broke his family apart. He expected a legal war with the bank. He expected a town that had forgotten his face. But when he kicked open the door of his childhood home, he didn't find emptiness. He found the widow Lorena Bishop standing in the hall holding a loaded Winchester and a secret that would turn the Wyoming Territory upside down. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the true story of how a cowboy went home to settle a debt and found himself fighting a war for the woman who once shattered his heart. The wind in the Wyoming Territory didn't just blow, it scoured. It carried the grit of the high desert, stripping paint from wood and hope from men. Caleb Montgomery pulled the brim of his Stetson, lower his eyes narrowing against the biting dust as his horse, a roan gelding named Jericho, crested the final ridge. Below him lay the Double M Ranch. From this distance it looked like a scar on the landscape. The main house, once a proud two-story structure of whitewashed timber, was now grey and peeling, leaning slightly to the west, as if tired of fighting the prevailing winds. The corral fences were gap-toothed, and the windmill groaned with a metallic shriek that echoed up the canyon, a lonely rhythmic cry of neglect. Caleb shifted in his saddle, the leather creaking. He was 32 years old, but the last 10 years spent driving cattle from Texas to Montana had aged him into a man of 40. He wore a Colt Peacemaker on his hip, the bluing worn off the barrel from use not display. He wasn't a gunslinger, but in the territories, the line between a cowboy and a killer was often just a matter of provocation. He hadn't stepped foot on this land since the night of the fire, the night he and his father, Elias Montgomery, had exchanged blows, and Caleb had ridden out with a bloody lip and a vow never to return. But Elias was dead. A heart attack, the telegram had said. A lonely death for a hard man. "Easy, Jericho," Caleb murmured, spurring the horse down the switchback trail. The town of Purgatory Creek was 5 miles east, but Caleb had no desire to see civilization yet. He wanted to survey his inheritance. He wanted to see if there was anything worth salvaging, or if he should just sign the deed over to the bank and ride north again. As he rode into the yard, the silence was heavy. It wasn't the peaceful silence of nature. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of abandonment. Weeds grew waist-high around the porch. A rusted plow sat half buried in the dirt like the skeleton of a prehistoric beast. Caleb dismounted, tying Jericho to the only sturdy rail left on the hitching post. He walked up the steps, his boots thudding heavily on the warped wood. He reached for the door handle, iron cold and rough, and pushed. The door swung open with a protest of dry hinges. The air inside was stale, trapped for years. But beneath the smell of dust and old tobacco there was something else, a scent that hit Caleb like a physical blow to the gut. Lavender and beeswax. He froze his hand instinctively, dropping to the handle of his revolver. That scent didn't belong here. It belonged to a memory he had spent a decade trying to drown in cheap whiskey and hard labor. "Who's there?" He called out, his voice raspy. From the shadows of the parlor, a figure emerged. She stepped into the shaft of afternoon light cutting through the dirty window, and the breath left Caleb's lungs. She was wearing a black morning dress, high-collared and severe, but it couldn't hide the fiery defiance in her green eyes. She was older now, the softness of girlhood replaced by the sharp angles of a woman who had survived the frontier, But she was still the most beautiful thing Caleb had ever seen, and she was pointing a double-barreled shotgun squarely at his chest. "You're trespassing," she said. Her voice was steady, cold as a mountain creek. "Lorena," Caleb whispered, disregarding the weapon. Lorena Bishop, born Lorena Sterling, the girl he had planned to marry, the girl who had promised to wait, the girl who had married Jedediah Bishop, the town's wealthiest merchant, 6 months after Caleb left. "I said you're trespassing," she repeated, though the barrels of the gun wavered slightly. "State your business or get off this land." "My business?" Caleb laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "I'm Caleb Montgomery. This is my father's house. I reckon that makes it mine." Lorena didn't lower the gun. "Elias is dead, Caleb. We buried him 3 days ago on the hill. You weren't here. I was 3 states away when the wire came," Caleb defended, taking a slow step forward. "Put the gun down, Raina. You know I'm not here to hurt you." "I don't know anything about you anymore," she snapped. "The Caleb I knew wouldn't have left his father to rot in this house alone for 10 years. That man made his choice," Caleb growled, the old anger flaring up. "And I made mine. But that doesn't change the law. I'm the sole heir. Now why are you in my house pointing a scattergun at me? Did Jedediah send you to collect on some debt my father owed?" At the mention of her husband's name, Lorena's expression fractured. A flash of pain crossed her face, raw and deep. She lowered the gun slowly, leaning it against a dusty armchair. "Jedediah is dead, Caleb," she said quietly. "He died last winter. Influenza." Caleb paused, the hostility draining out of him, replaced by a confused sympathy. I didn't know." "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said, brushing a stray lock of auburn hair from her face. "He was a good man. Better than most." She looked Caleb up and down, her eyes assessing the dust on his coat, the gun on his hip. "And as for why I'm here, I'm not collecting a debt, Caleb. I live here." Caleb blinked. "You what?" "I moved in 6 months ago to take care of Elias." The room seemed to spin. "You taking care of my father?" He hated the Sterlings. He hated everyone. He was sick, Caleb, and he was alone. Someone had to do it. She walked over to the heavy oak desk in the corner, Elias's command center, and picked up a thick envelope sealed with red wax. "You think you can just waltz back in here, shake the dust off your coat, and sell this place to the highest bidder?" Lorena asked, holding the envelope out to him. "You think it's that simple?" "It should be," Caleb said, wary of the envelope. "I'm the son." "Read it," she challenged. Caleb took the envelope. He broke the wax seal, his rough fingers clumsy. He pulled out the parchment, recognizing the scrawl of Judge Thaddeus O'Malley, the only lawyer within 100 miles. He scanned the legal jargon, his eyes skipping down to the section marked Last Will and Testament. "I, Elias Montgomery, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath the Double M Ranch, including all livestock water rights and structures." Caleb stopped. He read the line again, then a third time. "This can't be right," he muttered. "It is," Lorena said, crossing her arms. "He changed it 2 weeks before he died." The will didn't leave the ranch to Caleb. Not entirely. To be divided equally between my estranged son, Caleb Montgomery, and my caretaker and companion, Lorena Bishop, provided that for a period of 1 year they both reside upon and work the land to restore its profitability. Should either party leave or fail in this duty, their share shall be forfeited to the other. Caleb looked up, paper shaking in his hand. He shackled us together. He knew you'd try to sell it and run. Lorena said, her voice devoid of triumph. And he knew I had nowhere else to go after the bank took Jedediah's store. He did this on purpose, Caleb. Even from the grave, Elias is pulling the strings. Caleb looked around the rotting room, then at the woman who had broken his heart, and finally at the deed that trapped them in a cage of his father's making. I won't do it, Caleb said. I'll contest it. You can try, Lorena replied. But the bank the Cattlemen's Exchange out of Cheyenne is coming for the inspection on Friday. If there isn't a working management plan in place by then, they foreclose on the liens Elias took out. We lose everything. You lose your inheritance, and I lose the roof over my head. She stepped closer, her green eyes locking onto his. You ran away once, Caleb. Are you going to run again? Or are you going to stay and fight? The silence following Lorena's challenge hung in the air, like smoke after a gunshot. Caleb stared at her, seeing the fatigue etched around her eyes, the roughness of her hands that used to play the piano now calloused from work. How much? Caleb asked, his voice low. How much is the lien? Lorena walked to the window looking out at the overgrown yard. $3,000. Elias took it out to dig new wells during the drought of '81. He never found water. The money just evaporated. $3,000. It was a fortune. A cowboy made $30 a month and found. To pay that off, they'd need a miracle or a gold mine. And who holds the note? Caleb asked. Brogan Hayes. The name landed hard. Brogan Hayes wasn't a banker. He was a predator. He had started as a cattle rustler in the 70s, legitimized himself with blood money, and now practically owned the valley north of Purgatory Creek. If Hayes held the note, he didn't want the money. He wanted the land. Specifically, the water rights to the creek that ran through the Double M. Hayes. Caleb rubbed his jaw. If Hayes wants this place, he won't wait for us to fail. He'll help us fail. He already has, Lorena said softly. 2 weeks ago, someone cut the northern fence. We lost 20 head of cattle. Elias. The stress of it is what brought on the final attack. Caleb felt a cold rage tightening his chest. His father might have been a bastard, but he was a Montgomery, and murder by harassment was still murder. I need to see O'Malley, Caleb said, shoving the will into his coat pocket. I need to make sure this paper is ironclad. It is, Lorena said. But go ahead, ride into town. Just remember, Caleb, the guest room is the one at the end of the hall. Don't think about sleeping in Elias's room. I haven't cleared his things out yet. I'm not sleeping here, Caleb said instinctively. The will says you have to reside here, she reminded him. Tonight counts. Caleb cursed under his breath, turned on his heel, and walked out. The ride to Purgatory Creek was a blur of anger and calculation. The town hadn't changed much. The Rising Sun Saloon still needed a coat of paint. The general store still had the same crooked sign. But there was a tension in the air, a wariness in the way people watched him ride down the main street. He tied Jericho outside the lawyer's office, a small brick building next to the sheriff's station. Judge Thaddeus P. O'Malley was a man who looked like a walrus stuffed into a cheap suit. He was nursing a glass of sherry when Caleb barged in. Caleb, O'Malley wheezed, not rising from his chair. I heard you rode in. My condolences regarding your father. Cut the niceties, Thaddeus. Caleb slammed the will onto the desk. Is this real? Did he really leave half the ranch to her? O'Malley adjusted his spectacles. Legally sound, my boy. Witnessed by the sheriff and myself. Your father was adamant. He felt he owed Mrs. Bishop a great debt. A debt? Caleb paced the small office. She married the man who bought me out of business, Thaddeus. Why would Elias care about her? O'Malley sighed, pouring a second glass of sherry and pushing it toward Caleb. Sit down, son. There are things you don't know. Things that happened after you left. Caleb didn't sit. Talk. When Jedediah died, Lorena was left with nothing. The bank, Hayes's bank, took the house, the store, everything. She was sleeping in the livery stable. Your father found her there. He took her in. She cooked for him, cleaned that pigsty of a house, read to him when his eyes went bad. She was the daughter he wished he had, Caleb. The daughter who stayed. The word stung. Caleb downed the sherry in one gulp. And Brogan Hayes, Caleb asked. Does he know about this arrangement? He knows, O'Malley nodded gravely. And he's not happy. He expected to foreclose the moment Elias died. With you back and the will tying the land up in probate for a year if you work it. Hayes is blocked. For now. O'Malley leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Watch your back, Caleb. Hayes has hired a new foreman. A man named Sluss. No, wait, scratch that. A man named Vargo. A gun hand from down Mexico way. Nasty piece of work. I can handle gun hands, Caleb said, turning to the door. It's not just guns, Caleb, O'Malley warned. It's the past. You and Lorena. This town remembers. And secrets have a way of rotting in the sun. Caleb rode back to the ranch as the sun began to dip behind the jagged peaks of the Tetons, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. When he reached the homestead, he saw smoke rising from the chimney. A warm yellow light glowed from the kitchen window. It looked inviting. It looked like a lie. He stabled Jericho, rubbing the horse down with a handful of dry straw. As he walked towards the house, he noticed something near the barn door. Fresh tracks. Not horse tracks. Boot prints. Someone had been standing there watching the house while Lorena was inside alone. Caleb drew his peacemaker, moving silently toward the porch. He eased the front door open. Lorena was in the kitchen chopping vegetables. A pot of stew bubbled on the stove. She looked up as he entered, her face pale. "You're back," she said. "We had a visitor," Caleb said, holstering his gun but keeping his hand near it. Tracks by the barn. Lorena's knife paused against a carrot. Hayes. Maybe his man. Vargo. Lorena put the knife down. Her hands were trembling. "Caleb, there's something else you need to know. About why Elias took out that loan. About why he was so desperate and for water. He was a rancher, Lorena. Ranchers always need water." "No." She shook her head. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object wrapped in a rag. She placed it on the table and unfolded the cloth. Inside lay a nugget of rock. It was quartz, streaked with a thick, jagged vein of dull yellow metal. Caleb picked it up. It was heavy. He scratched it with his thumbnail. It left a mark. Gold. "He found it in the dry creek bed 3 years ago," Lorena whispered. "That's why he wanted the wells. He wasn't looking for water, Caleb. He was looking for the mother lode. He thought the source was deep underground." Caleb stared at the gold. This changed everything. It wasn't just about cattle or water rights, if Hayes knew about this. "Does anyone else know?" Caleb asked, his voice tight. "Just Elias. And me. And now you." She paused, swallowing hard. "But last week before he died, Elias was delirious. He was shouting about the gold. The window was open. The doctor was there. And the doctor's assistant. Who is the assistant? A boy named Toby. He drinks at the saloon. He talks. Caleb closed his eyes. The secret was out. Hayes didn't just want the land for grazing. He wanted the mine, and he would kill both of them to get it. Suddenly the glass of the kitchen window shattered inward. A bullet slammed into the wood of the table, inches from the gold nugget, sending splinters flying. Lorena screamed, dropping to the floor. Caleb flipped the table over, shoving Lorena behind it, as a second shot blew out the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. "Stay down!" Caleb roared, drawing his Colt. From the darkness outside, a voice laughed, a high, wheezing sound. "Welcome home, Cowboy!" The siege of the Double M had begun. The kitchen was a chaotic swirl of darkness and moonlight. Shards of glass from the window crunched under Caleb's boots as he crab-walked toward the heavy oak door leading to the hallway. "Stay low," he hissed at Lorena. Another shot rang out from the yard, the muzzle flash illuminating the darkness for a split second. The bullet punched through the thin wood of the wall, sending a spray of plaster dust into the air. It was suppression fire. They were trying to keep Caleb pinned while they moved closer. "They're coming for the door," Caleb whispered. He could hear the heavy thud of boots on the porch steps. Lorena didn't scream. To Caleb's surprise, she didn't even cry. In the gloom, he saw her crawl toward the corner where she'd left the double-barreled shotgun earlier. "Is it loaded?" Caleb asked, his voice tight. "Buckshot in both barrels," she replied, her voice shaking but resolute. "Good. Watch the back door. If it opens, don't ask who it is. Just pull the trigger." Caleb rolled to the window, risking a glance over the sill. 2 shadows were moving near the water trough. A third was on the porch. He thumbed back the hammer of his peacemaker. He breathed out, steadying his hand against the adrenaline flooding his veins. Crack! Caleb fired. The shadow on the porch grunted and stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. A curse ripped through the night air, Spanish mixed with English. "Vargo!" the wounded man shouted. "He fights!" "Burn it!" a voice commanded from the tree line. "Burn them out!" Fear, cold and sharp, spiked in Caleb's chest. A shootout he could handle. Fire in a wooden house in the middle of a drought was a death sentence. "Lorena the cellar," Caleb barked. "Go!" "I'm not leaving you," she yelled back. "They're going to torch the house. Get to the root cellar. The door is outside, round the back. I'll cover you." "No." She scrambled over to him, grabbing his arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "The trapdoor in the pantry." "It leads down to the old storm shelter. We can wait them out." Caleb didn't argue. He fired 2 more shots blindly through the window to keep the attackers' heads down, then grabbed Lorena's hand. They scrambled into the pantry, a narrow closet smelling of onions and dry rot. Lorena kicked aside a rug, revealing an iron ring set into the floorboards. She heaved it up. The black hole beneath smelled of damp earth. "Get in," she ordered. "Ladies first." Caleb shoved her gently. She dropped into the darkness. Caleb followed, pulling the heavy trapdoor shut above them, just as the sound of shattering glass and the whoosh of an oil lamp being thrown echoed from the parlor. They huddled in the cramped darkness of the storm shelter. It was an earthen dugout, barely 5 feet high, lined with shelves of preserved peaches and pickles. Above them they heard heavy boots storming into the kitchen. "Where are they?" Vargo's voice was muffled but audible through the floorboards. "Gone. Maybe out the back." "Find the gold," Vargo roared. "Tear this place apart." Caleb felt Lorena trembling against him. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her tight against his chest. He could feel her heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. In the terrifying intimacy of the dark, the years of separation seemed to dissolve. She smelled of gunpowder, now mixed with that faint, enduring lavender. Above them, furniture was overturned, crockery smashed. The heavy boots paced back and forth, inches above their heads. "Boss, the fire didn't take. Wood's too rot-damp near the porch." "Forget the fire," Vargo growled. "We made our point. If they aren't dead, they're scared. Let them rot in their fear tonight. We own the night. We'll be back." The footsteps receded. Horses whinnied and galloped away, the sound fading into the vast emptiness of the prairie. Caleb didn't move for a long time. He kept his arm around Lorena, his chin resting on the top of her head. "They're gone," he whispered finally. Lorena let out a shuddering breath and pulled away, striking a match against the stone wall. The sudden flare of light illuminated her face, streaked with dust and tears she refused to let fall. "They know about the gold," she said, her voice hollow. "They won't stop." "No," Caleb said, his face grim. "They won't, which means we can't stay here. Not like this." He looked at the woman he had left behind. In the flickering matchlight, he saw the scar on her chin he didn't remember. He saw the way her hands were clenched into fists. "Why did you stay, Lorena?" He asked the question, slipping out before he could stop it. "With Elias. He was a monster to you." Lorena blew out the match, plunging them back into darkness. "Because," she whispered from the black, "he was the only link I had left to you." The silence that followed was heavier than the earth above them. Caleb reached out, finding her hand in the dark. He squeezed it once. She squeezed back. For that night in the cold belly of the earth, there was a truce. The ghosts of the past were still there. But for the first time in 10 years, they weren't facing them alone. Dawn broke over the double M like a bruise, purple and grey. Caleb pushed the trapdoor open and climbed out, his body stiff and aching. The kitchen was a wreck. Flour covered the floor like snow. The table was overturned, the chairs smashed. But the house still stood. Lorena climbed out after him, dusting off her black dress. She looked around the devastation, her expression hardening. She walked over to the stove, righted the coffee pot, and miraculously found it undamaged. "I'll make coffee," she said. It was an absurdly domestic statement in the middle of a war zone, but Caleb understood. It was an act of defiance. "You can smash my house, but you can't stop me from living." "I'm going to town," Caleb said, checking the load in his Colt. "I need to send a telegram to the marshal in Cheyenne, though I doubt he'll ride this far, for a squabble over a ranch. And I need to see Hayes." "Hayes!" Lorena spun around. "You can't walk into the lion's den, Caleb. Vargo will be there. If I don't go to him, he'll think we're cowering in the dirt. I need to look him in the eye. Men like Hayes, they feed on fear. I need to show him I'm not hungry." "Take the buckboard," she said. "We need supplies, boards to fix the windows, nails, ammunition." "I'm staying here," she said firmly. "Someone has to watch the land, and I need to bury the gold." Caleb nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the heavy nugget. He handed it to her. "Hide it deep, Raina. Somewhere even I wouldn't think to look." Purgatory. Creek was bustling by the time Caleb rolled the wagon down Main Street. The morning sun was bright, belying the violence of the night before. He tied the team in front of the general store, but instead of going in, he walked across the street to the building with the polished brass sign, Hayes and Cumberland Bank and Land Trust. He pushed through the double doors. The bank was cool and quiet, smelling of paper and ink. A clerk looked up, startled by Caleb's disheveled appearance. "I'm here to see Brogan Hayes," Caleb announced. "Mr. Hayes is busy. I'm not whole." A smooth baritone voice called from the balcony office above. Brogan Hayes descended the stairs. He was a large man, wearing a suit that cost more than the double M was worth. He had a thick moustache and eyes like polished flint. He didn't look like a cattle rustler anymore. He looked like a senator. "Caleb Montgomery." Hayes smiled, extending a hand. Caleb didn't take it. "I heard you were back. Tragic business about your father." "Cut the act, Brogan," Caleb said, his voice carrying through the quiet bank. "Your dog Vargo paid us a visit last night." Hayes's smile didn't falter, but his eyes went cold. "Vargo is a spirited employee. Sometimes he gets overzealous about security. I assure you I have no knowledge of any illegal activities. He shot up my house. He tried to burn it down." "Did he?" Hayes tisked. "Sounds like a rough welcome. Perhaps the territory is too dangerous for you, Caleb. You've been gone a long time. Things have changed. The bank is always willing to take that burden off your hands. I can offer you a fair price for the deed right now. Enough to get you back to Texas in comfort." "I'm not selling." Caleb stepped closer. "And if Vargo sets foot on my land again, I won't be sending him back with a warning. I'll strap him to his horse belly down." Hayes leaned in his voice, dropping to a whisper only Caleb could hear. "You're playing a losing hand, boy. The lien is due in 4 days. And even if you pay it, accidents happen. Wells run dry. Barns burn. And widows, they have such fragile constitutions." Caleb grabbed Hayes by the lapels, shoving him back against the teller's cage. The clerk gasped. "You touch her," Caleb snarled, "and I will burn this bank to the ground with you inside it." "Sheriff," Hayes shouted, not looking rattled in the least. The door opened, and a shadow fell over them. Sheriff Big Jim Taggart stood there, his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. He looked tired, his badge tarnished. "Let him go, Caleb," Taggart said wearily. Caleb released Hayes, smoothing his own coat. "Tell your master to stay off my land, Jim." "I'm the law here, Caleb," Taggart warned, though his eyes wouldn't meet Caleb's. "Don't start a war you can't finish." "The war's already started," Caleb spat and stormed out. Caleb spent the last of his pocket money on supplies, lumber nails, coffee flour, and 3 boxes of 45 cartridges. As he was loading the wagon, a hand clapped him on the shoulder. He spun around, hand on his gun. It was a man with one eye and a limp smelling of horse liniment and rye whiskey. "Easy, Trigger." The man laughed. "You always were jumpy." "Jubal." Caleb grinned. Jubal Early had been the foreman of the Double M when Caleb was a boy. He was old now, his face a map of wrinkles, but he was still standing. "Heard you were back," Jubal said, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "Heard you made a scene at the bank. That was stupid." "Nice to see you too, Jubal." "You need help out there," Jubal said seriously. "Vargo has 10 men. You have a widow and a rusty revolver." "I can't pay you, Jubal." "Didn't ask for pay. I got a score to settle with Hayes myself. He foreclosed on my brother's farm last year. Besides," Jubal looked at the loaded wagon, "I always liked Lorena. She's got grit, more than you deserve." "Grab your gear," Caleb said. "We ride in 10 minutes." The ride back was quiet. Jubal sat shotgun a Winchester rifle across his knees. When they pulled into the yard, the sun was setting. Lorena was on the porch, hammering a board over the broken window. She stopped when she saw Jubal, a genuine smile breaking through her exhaustion. "You old goat," she called out. "I thought you died." "Too mean to die, Miss Lorena." Jubal tipped his hat. Later that night, after Jubal had taken the first watch in the barn, Caleb found Lorena on the porch. The air was cooling the cicadas, humming their electric song. "Jubal's a good man," she said, looking out at the dark horizon. "He is." Caleb leaned against the railing. "I asked around town today. About Jedediah." Lorena stiffened. "And what did the gossips say?" "They said he bought your father's debts, that he threatened to put your family on the street unless you married him." Lorena turned to him, her eyes flashing. "Is that what you think? That I was sold?" "I don't know what to think, Rena. I just know that I wrote you, every week for a year. I told you I was working, saving money to send for you, and then I got a letter saying you were Mrs. Bishop." "You wrote?" Lorena's voice cracked. "Caleb, I never got a single letter." Caleb froze. "What? I waited," she said, tears spilling over. "I waited on this porch every day for 6 months. My father said you had forgotten me. He said you were a drifter who found a new girl in every town. I didn't believe him. But then the letters stopped coming from me. You wrote me, dozens of times, to the address in Abilene you gave me before you left. I never left Abilene for 6 months waiting for word from you." Caleb said, the horror dawning on him. "Someone intercepted them." "My father," Lorena whispered. "He intercepted them. He needed Jedediah's money. He sold me, Caleb, but he made me believe you had abandoned me first." The realization hit Caleb like a physical blow. The wasted years, the anger, the bitterness. It was all built on a lie manufactured by a greedy old man. He looked at Lorena, really looked at her, and saw the girl he had loved, trapped in the life of a woman who had been betrayed by every man she ever trusted. "I never stopped," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. He stepped closer, invading her space. "I never stopped loving you. I hated you for 10 years, and I still loved you every damn day." Lorena looked up at him, her breath hitching. "Caleb." He reached out, cupping her face in his rough hands. Her skin was warm. She leaned into his touch, a sob escaping her throat. "We can't change the past," Caleb whispered, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "But we can fight for the future. I'm not running this time, Lorena. I'm staying. For the land. For the gold. But mostly for you." He lowered his head, and she rose to meet him. Their lips met, not tentative, but desperate, a kiss 10 years in the making. It tasted of salt and grief, and a hope that was terrifyingly bright. But the moment was shattered by the sound of hoofbeats thundering toward the house. Jubal shouted from the barn, "Riders coming fast!" Caleb pulled away the softness in his eyes, instantly replaced by steel. He drew his gun. "Get inside," he ordered. The war for the Double M wasn't over. It was just getting started. The riders didn't storm the house. They didn't have to. Instead, they swept through the lower pasture like a scythe. From the darkened parlor window, Caleb and Lorena watched as the torches flared in the night. The sound of gunfire popped in the distance, not aimed at the house, but at the herd. The terrified lowing of cattle filled the valley, followed by the thundering of hooves as the animals stampeded toward the broken southern fence line. "They're not killing us," Jubal growled, racking the slide of his Winchester. "They're bankrupting us. That herd was the only liquid asset listed in the will." Caleb lowered his Colt, his jaw set so hard it ached. "If we lose the cattle, we can't show a profit. If we can't show a profit, the bank argues mismanagement before the probate court. Hayes wins without firing a shot at us. We can't stop them, Lorena said, her voice devoid of panic replaced by a cold calculation. There's 20 of them and 3 of us. If we go out there, we die. The night wore on, a torture of noise and fire. By dawn, the Double M was silent. The corral was empty. The cattle were gone, scattered into the Badlands, or rustled by Vargo's men. The ranch was effectively dead. But the gold remained. The 3 of them gathered in the kitchen, drinking bitter coffee. The morning light revealed the exhaustion on their faces. Jubal was cleaning his rifle. Lorena was staring at the map spread out on the table. We have 3 days until the inspection, Lorena said. Without the cattle, the ranch is worthless on paper. We can't pay the $3,000 lien. We have the nuggets, Caleb said, nodding toward the floorboards where the stash was hidden. There's 5 pounds of raw gold there. That's worth near $1,500. It's half of what we need, but it buys us an extension. Not in this town, Jubal spat. You try to cash that gold at the assay office in Purgatory Creek, and the clerk will flag it. Hayes will claim it was stolen from one of his claims. He'll impound it. Then we don't go to Purgatory, Caleb said. We go to Cheyenne, the federal assay office. Hayes's reach doesn't extend to the U.S. Marshals. Cheyenne is a 2-day ride, Lorena pointed out. Through the Black Rock Canyon. It's ambush country. It's the only play we have, Caleb said. Before they could finalize the plan, the sound of a buggy approaching the house drew their attention. Caleb moved to the window. It's the sheriff, he said, and he's not alone. Sheriff Big Jim Taggart climbed out of the buggy, followed by 2 deputies armed with shotguns. They stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Caleb walked out, hand hovering near his gun. You're trespassing, Jim, unless you're here to arrest the men who stole my cattle last night. Taggart looked down at his boots, shifting his weight. I didn't see any rustlers, Caleb, but I have a warrant here. A warrant? Caleb laughed bitterly. For who, me, for defending my home? No, Taggart said. He pointed a finger at Jubal, who had stepped out onto the porch behind Caleb. For him, Jubal Early. What? Jubal barked. Outstanding warrant from 1878. Taggart read from a piece of paper. Horse theft in Sweetwater County. Judge signed it this morning. That was 10 years ago, Jubal shouted. And the charges were dropped. I have the papers. The courthouse burned down in 80, Taggart said impassively. Records were lost. The complaint has been refiled. You're coming with me, Jubal. This is Hayes, Caleb snarled, stepping down the stairs. He's stripping our defenses. The 2 deputies leveled their shotguns at Caleb. Don't do it, son, Taggart warned, his hand on his revolver. Don't make me kill you over an old horse thief. Let the law handle it. The law? Lorena stepped out, her voice ringing clear. There is no law here, Sheriff. Just Brogan Hayes' checkbook. Jubal put a hand on Caleb's shoulder. Let it be Caleb. I'm an old man. I can sit in a cell for a few days. You 2 have work to do. Jubal surrendered his rifle and walked down the steps. As they handcuffed him, he caught Caleb's eye. Run his eyes said, Run now. As the sheriff's buggy disappeared down the dusty road, the silence of the ranch felt heavier than ever. It was just Caleb and Lorena now. The odds had shifted from desperate to impossible. We leave tonight, Caleb said, turning to Lorena. We take the back trails. Jericho is fast, but he can't carry double all the way to Cheyenne at a gallop. We take the buckboard wagon, cover the gold in sacks of feed. If they catch us on the road, Lorena started. They won't, Caleb promised, though he didn't believe it himself. He took her hands. I'm not losing you again, Rena. Not to Hayes. Not to anyone. Lorena looked at him, and for a moment, the hardness of the frontier woman melted. She reached up, touching the stubble on his cheek. Then teach me, she said. Teach you what? How to shoot that peacemaker of yours. I can handle a shotgun, but if we're on the road, I need to know how to fight like you. They spent the afternoon behind the barn. Caleb stood behind her, his arms wrapping around hers to steady the heavy Colt .45. He corrected her stance, her grip the way she sighted down the barrel. The smell of gun smoke and lavender mixed in the air. Every time the gun kicked, she flinched less. By sunset, she could hit a fence post at 20 paces. It wasn't just target practice. It was a bonding ritual, a preparation for war. As dusk fell, they loaded the wagon. 5 pounds of gold wrapped in oilcloth, hidden inside a hollowed-out sack of oats, a jug of water, dried beef, and every bullet they had left. Caleb harnessed the team 2 sturdy draft horses. He tied Jericho to the back of the wagon. "Why bring the saddle horse?" Lorena asked. "Insurance," Caleb said grimly. They rolled out under the cover of a moonless night, bypassing the main road and heading straight for the jagged silhouette of the Black Rock Canyon. They were running for their lives, carrying a fortune in gold, with a ghost army on their heels. The Black Rock Canyon was a geological wound in the earth, a narrow, twisting pass flanked by sheer granite walls that rose 200 feet on either side. It was the fastest route to Cheyenne, but it was also a death trap. The shadows here were absolute, swallowing the starlight, and the only sound was the grinding of wagon wheels on loose shale. Caleb drove the team hard, his eyes scanning the rim of the canyon high above. Beside him, Lorena gripped the Winchester, her knuckles white. She looked like a drover in her heavy duster and low-brimmed hat, but her eyes betrayed the terror of a woman who knew she was being hunted. "It's too quiet," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Keep your eyes up," Caleb murmured. "We're almost to the anvil." They were approaching the Devil's Anvil, a massive boulder balanced precariously over the trail, creating a natural choke point. As they rounded the bend, Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. The trail was blocked. A felled pine tree lay across the path, its branches sprawling like skeletal fingers. "Trap!" Caleb shouted, hauling back on the reins. From the high ridge muzzle flashes lit up the grey dawn. Bullets struck the ground around the wagon, kicking up geysers of dirt. The lead horse reared screaming as a slug grazed its flank. "Get down!" Caleb roared, shoving Lorena toward the floorboards. "They're behind us too," she cried, pointing back down the trail, where 3 riders were closing in, cutting off their retreat. Caleb looked at the steep slope of loose scree leading up the canyon wall to their left. It was too steep for the wagon, but a horse, a strong, desperate horse, might make it. "We can't fight them all," Caleb said, his voice grim. He grabbed the heavy sack of oats containing the gold and leaped from the wagon, running to the back to untie Jericho. "Caleb, what are you doing?" Lorena scrambled down, clutching the rifle. "You're taking the gold," Caleb said, throwing the sack over Jericho's saddle horn and lashing it tight. "Jericho can climb that slope. The wagon can't. I am not leaving you here to die." "You have to." Caleb grabbed her by the shoulders, his eyes fierce. "If they get the gold, Hayes wins. If you get to Cheyenne, you save the ranch. You save us. Now ride Lorena." He lifted her by the waist and threw her into the saddle. He sapped Jericho hard on the rump. "Go!" As Lorena spurred the horse up the treacherous slope, Caleb dove behind the wagon. He grabbed his Colt and began to fire, not to kill, but to draw every eye and every bullet toward him. He watched Vargo's men scramble for cover, buying Lorena precious seconds. He saw her crest the ridge a silhouette against the rising sun before disappearing over the top. She was safe. Caleb turned back to the fight, firing until the hammer clicked on an empty chamber. The silence that followed was heavy. Vargo rode up slowly, a cruel sneer on his face. He looked at the empty wagon, then at the tracks leading up the cliff. "She's gone." Vargo spat, leaning down to pistol whip Caleb across the temple. The world went black. Caleb woke to the smell of stale tobacco and the taste of blood. He was tied to a chair in the center of his own parlor at the Double M. The room had been ransacked. Brogan Hayes sat in Elias's old armchair, looking impeccably calm. Vargo stood by the window nursing a cigar. "You fought well," Hayes said, pouring himself a glass of water. "But you missed the point, Caleb. You think I care about a few nuggets of gold in a creek bed." Hayes stood and ripped a painting off the wall, revealing a surveyor's map pinned beneath. Thick red lines cut across the territory. "Gold is heavy. It's hard to mine," Hayes whispered, tapping the map. "But iron is the future. The Union Pacific needs a new spur line through the Teton Pass. They need water for the steam engines. Your father's land is the only viable route." Caleb stared at the map. It wasn't a land dispute. It was empire building. Hayes stood to make $100,000 by selling the right-of-way. "The inspection is tomorrow." Hayes checked his pocket watch. "Sign the deed over to me, and I'll let you live. Refuse and Vargo buries you in the cellar." "And Lorena," Caleb rasped. "My men are tracking her. She won't make it to Cheyenne." Caleb's heart sank, but then he saw it. Through the dusty window behind Hayes, a glint of light flashed on the distant ridge. A reflection. Not a rock, but a glass lens. She hadn't gone to Cheyenne. She had come back. Caleb looked at Hayes and forced a broken smile. "I'll sign. Just give me the pen." He needed to buy her one clear shot. The window exploded inward in a shower of glass. Vargo screamed, his leg buckling as the rifle slug tore through his thigh. He collapsed his gun, skittering across the floorboards. Caleb didn't hesitate. He drove his shoulder into Hayes's midsection, slamming the banker into the wall with the force of a battering ram. The breath left Hayes in a whoosh, and the ink pot on the table shattered, staining the fraudulent deed black. By the time Hayes scrambled for the derringer hidden in his vest, the front door was kicked open. Lorena stood there, silhouetted by the harsh noon sun, the Winchester smoking in her hands. She pumped the lever, chambering a fresh round, and leveled it at the banker's chest. "Drop it, Brogan!" she commanded, her voice ringing with the authority of the land itself. Hayes froze. He looked from the bleeding gunman on the floor to the woman he had underestimated, and finally at Caleb, who was wiping blood from his lip with a savage grin. The game was up. Sheriff Taggart arrived 10 minutes later, his timing suspicious but welcome. With Vargo confessing to save his own skin and the railroad map on the wall, proving Hayes's intent to defraud the estate, the sheriff had no choice but to clamp irons on the town's wealthiest man. 3 days later, Caleb and Lorena walked into the federal assay office in Cheyenne. They didn't sell the gold, they leveraged it. They paid the lien in full. With the debt cleared, they renegotiated the railroad contract on their terms. The Double M wasn't just saved, it was secured for generations. But that evening, as the sun set over the jagged peaks of the Tetons, painting the sky in violent purples and soft oranges, Caleb found Lorena on the porch. She wasn't looking at the gold or the new contract. She was watching the wind ripple through the grass. Caleb walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder, inhaling the scent of lavender and rain. They weren't rich because of the metal in the ground or the tracks that would soon cut through the valley. They were rich because the house behind them was no longer a rotting monument to a hateful past. It was a home. "You staying?" Lorena asked softly, her hand covering his. Caleb kissed her temple, watching the first stars appear above Purgatory Creek. "I'm done running, Rena," he whispered. "I'm finally home." And that is the legend of Caleb and Lorena, a story of grit gold and a love that refused to die in the dust. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest treasure in the West wasn't what you pulled out of the ground, but who you had standing beside you when the bullets started flying. If you enjoyed this journey through the Wild West, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel ride further. Do you think Caleb should have sold the land? Or did he make the right choice? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a story from the frontier. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next trail.